what do we actually know about levels of exercise happening during this crisis period and how that varies between different groups in society, and particularly among children?
We do ourselves know a reasonable amount of the first 4 weeks of what we've experienced. You'll be familiar, I know, from your previous role with the Active Life survey that Sport England has traditionally held over the last 3-4 years, which is the largest survey of activity levels in England by far. That survey last reported quite recently, but was for up until last November. And that showed us that actually we had record levels of activity overall in this country. We were seeing nearly, slightly over 1 million people being more active against the Chief Medical Officer's definition than we had seen at the start of the cycle. So we could see a position where more and more people were being active in their lives. But within that, even before the COVID crisis, that was showing some inequalities that we recognised were pretty stubborn. That there was certainly an inequality still around gender, although through This Girl Can and many other campaigns to drive women's sport, heard about that again from cricket and rugby this morning, that gap is undoubtedly closing. There were some definite challenges around disability and disabled people's activities, not least because we weren't best placed as a system, I think, to help and support them. Although again, in the last set of survey figures from Active Lives, we were seeing some improvement there. There are some interesting but also very worrying inequalities around ethnicity and the way that that actually is a determining factor in people's level of activity. But the biggest one overall and a consistent inequality was socially economic. It was the economic circumstances that people found themselves in that tended to indicate their levels of activity. And I say by all of that by way of preface, because we've held weekly surveys, 2,000 people, adults 16 plus, since the crisis began, doing that through Savanta Comres. And those patterns have fundamentally not really shifted. So overall, I'm delighted that we have seen activity levels on the whole sort of be largely maintained. But I think we are, within that as well, seeing people recognizing the importance of physical activity to their physical and mental well-being. And I think that's a key factor in this current environment. But we have seen those inequalities maintained, and in some ways they've started to worsen. And I think particularly if I were to point out your point about younger people and children, and I know you were very familiar with this in your time as Secretary of State, we are in a position where, relatively speaking, we do not have active young people in the way that we would want to see. That in particular, you have about a third of children who are not doing the recommended Chief Medical Officer's amount of activity per week. That figure is getting worse in the current environment. We now think that it's about 44% of children are either doing no activity or less than half an hour's activity every day in the current crisis. So on top of what's happening in the adult population, which is a genuine maintenance of activity as a whole, we've seen indeed some positives. I don't know if any of the committee members now ride a bike or go for a run more regularly and frequently than they might have done before. But we hope and think that there are some great habits forming in terms of people's daily activity now. We've tried very hard through our Join the Movement campaign, which has got a hashtag to stay in and work out, to show what's possible in the home. There are some people, I don't think Joe Wicks needs any more publicity than he's already getting, but there are some people who've really demonstrated what's possible in the home. But at the same time, we are concerned that as the weeks go on, that activity level is maintained, and that the inequalities that we see in everyday life, if you like, are being maintained in terms of what we're seeing across the